As I was running my first ever steroid cycle, standing outside on a sunny day, posing under the very generous outdoor lighting for a family photo, I ended up receiving a not so generous eye-opener. It seemed that my hairline was receding, with the back and sides clearly dominating. As the cycle ended, I decided to accept the situation and start the education. Somehow, it kind of worked. Here is what I did and why. Alright, so starting off, let's discuss how androgens or anabolic steroids affect hair loss. Later on in this video, I'll get into my personal experience with all of this. But first, let's look at the science of it all. So, as we mentioned in the first video around hair loss, this is caused by a cascade of different activities. It starts out with the scalp tension. The scalp tension creates a form of inflammation. The body responds to that inflammation with multiple actions. One of them is DHT, sent to the skin in order to repair it. And what this results in is basically excess collagen deposition, which creates fibrosis, which is a form of scar tissue. And as that fibrosis begins to form, we start to see that the hair follicle is basically choked off, both from blood flow and both from its sort of space where it can actually grow in the skin. So DHT, or any other androgen, is part of this cascade of actions. However, it is not the initiator, you could say. And you could also say that it does turn up the volume of hair loss due to its activity at one of the stages. Okay, so how do androgens increase the rate of hair loss? And when we say androgens, we're also referring to exogenous hormones or anabolic steroids that are injected or consumed orally or whatever form, cream, whatever. Now, firstly, what anabolic steroids do is they compete for the androgen receptor. That's how they create their DNA signaling and their effects. So, as they are competing for the AR or the androgen receptor, the testosterone that is also trying to compete, or the DHT that is also trying to compete for that AR, is at some times or at some points losing that competition. So that means that more free DHT or free testosterone is accumulating in the blood as the anabolic steroid is attaching to the androgen receptor instead of it. Now, even if the steroid itself doesn't cause hair loss directly, it still pushes more free testosterone to be available as a substrate to convert to DHT, which does. Another way that steroids in general can increase hair loss is many of them tend to attach to the sex hormone binding globulin molecule, or SHBG. And again, lowering SHBG increases free testosterone, increases more substrate for DHT conversion. Something worth mentioning too is the anabolic to androgenic ratio. So firstly, this ratio, many people do not even believe in its credibility. Firstly, because it was synthesized from experiments on animals, not on humans. And by the way, what it means is every steroid has an anabolic to androgenic ratio comparatively to testosterone. So testosterone is a 1-to-1 ratio. Then you have other steroids which will have different ratios according to how anabolic they are versus to how androgenic they are. So the anabolic to androgenic ratio has been debunked, not only because of the way it was originally created, but also because there are a lot of anecdotal studies out there to confirm that it's not that accurate. So going back to a previous point I mentioned, even if the anabolic to androgenic ratio was accurate and you were to get a steroid which is low on the androgenic scale, still any steroid to be effective needs to attach to the AR. So what I previously said still applies to low androgenic quote-unquote steroids. Now, I've been mentioning a lot that testosterone is starting to be freed up as anabolic steroids are used. So first of all, whenever a steroid cycle is implemented correctly, there would always be a backbone of testosterone. Why is this? Because most of the anabolic steroids suppress the natural production of one's testosterone. And being that testosterone is needed by the human body, a correct steroid protocol will have testosterone being replaced along with the anabolic steroid. So again, many times that's why adding more androgens is turning up that volume even more for hair loss. Not necessarily because of the androgens added themselves, because many of them are low on the androgenicity scale, although that is not that accurate, but mainly because they are always accompanied by testosterone, and that testosterone is, more of it is being freed up as androgens are accumulating, and more of it has the possibility to convert to DHT. All right, how does estrogen fit into all of this? So first of all, estrogen can be considered hair protective. It does this by prolonging the anagen growth phase of the hair. So dropping estrogen is removing a layer of hair protection as well. Now, many times when steroids are ingested, the majority of the times estrogen is going to increase. Of course, if steroids which have aromatase enzyme inhibition tendencies like primobolan, then of course that estrogen is going to drop. But not only that, most of the time when steroid cycles are implemented, especially larger ones with larger dosages, the tendency is to control estrogen. Sometimes that control can be done too aggressively with the use of AIs or primobolan, for example, or EQ as well. And that can result in dropping estrogen too low and further increasing the risk of hair loss. Now, as I was doing my research for this video, I came across a very interesting piece of information that I would like to share with you. And this is basically that DHT has a metabolite that can mimic very mildly the same effect as estrogen. That metabolite is called 3-beta androstenediol. Again, this seems like a very weak estrogen mimicking compound, and we are not sure whether DHT derivatives themselves metabolize into this compound either. Another way that is more on the speculative side, but how steroids can contribute to hair loss, is we mentioned the scalp tension theory. And as steroids are anabolic, meaning they grow muscle tissue, they can increase the muscles around the scalp that cause that tension. So that's another kind of indirect way that steroids can increase hair loss. Now, regarding the scalp tension theory, there was a study carried out in 2015 and it's referenced in my earlier video. And I might even put it up on screen on this video. All right, so let's go to my personal experience with hair loss. What fun. Now, basically, look, I was running my second steroid cycle. My first one didn't cause much hair loss, or at least I did not realize, because first of all, a point worth mentioning is that once you realize you're undergoing substantial hair loss, it probably means you have already had a lot of hair loss. So it's not something that you catch early, unfortunately, especially if you're not really looking out for it. So my second steroid cycle, I was in a family photo and it was outside. And as soon as I saw the photo, I'm like, whoa, my hair is definitely taking a hit here. So basically I finished the cycle just as planned, and I started researching on how I can recover my hair or prevent it from getting worse. Now, in my case, the steroid cycle was that volume amplification to pushing my hair loss to a visible level. So stopping the steroids or removing the steroids out of the equation was already a major improvement, because I did stop the steroids, but I took action as well. So I'm not sure what was what, but based on my own experience with hair loss and the timing of it all, the steroids were a major contributor. So stopping the steroids already improved. However, what I was also implementing was microneedling and topical minoxidil. I also decided to do a hair transplant. As I booked my hair transplant in advance, by the time I got to the hair transplant date, My hair had grown back quite substantially, but I decided to go with the transplant anyway to have more of an insurance line, if you will. We'll get to my hair transplant potentially in later videos if you guys are interested. Yeah, so what do I currently do to avoid or control hair loss as much as possible? So I still run androgens, mostly TRT, but sometimes a bit more than that. And the protocols I have in place are microneedling at about 1.5 to 1.75 millimeters depth once every week or two. I apply topically RU58841, which is an androgen receptor inhibitor, and I will get to the details of this compound in later videos, but I apply that topically every night. I wash my hair once, twice a week with kinocortisol shampoo. The one I use contains a lot of other stuff, which is more on the natural side of things. And scalp massages, I try to do them before I apply the RU in the evening, before I sleep basically. I believe they can help break up that fibrotic tissue and keep that blood flow going. Maybe we'll get into that as well. I also switched from topical minoxidil to oral minoxidil. The reason for this is minoxidil, to actually take effect, needs to be metabolized to its active form called minoxidil sulfate. And the thing is, not everyone has the enzyme in their scalp tissue to undergo that conversion, but everyone has it in their liver. So oral minoxidil is kind of guaranteeing that the minoxidil is going to be effective. Of course, it is taken orally, so as opposed to being applied topically in one area, it can affect the entire body, but that's something as well we'll get into later. So yeah, I also take GHKCU as part of the glow stack. Maybe some of you know this, but basically the glow stack is BPC157, TB4, and the GHKCU combined, and I take that once a day. All right, so that's it for today. However, in the next video, if there is interest from you guys, I will go into a bit more detail on the protocols I have in place. So if you want to know more about my protocol, comment down below. If you've made it this far in the video, don't forget to subscribe. It really means a lot, honestly. And if you have any ideas for future videos, please feel free to jot them down below. And I'll see you in the next video.